Welcome to the deep dive. Ever wonder why the experts, the people who seem to have all the answers, sometimes suggest one thing but then do something totally different themselves?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, today we're digging into exactly that. And it kind of starts with this really simple question from billionaire investor Sandy Gottesman. He asks, what do you own and why?
Just that. Sounds basic.
It does, right.
Yeah.
But it actually uncovers this huge, mile-wide gap sometimes between what logic says you should do and what people actually do in their own lives.
Yeah, and that's what we're exploring. This isn't just about financial spreadsheets or anything. It's really about how your own personal values, your unique situation, how that molds your decisions.
Often pushing aside the conventional wisdom.
Exactly. And we'll see why maybe following that personal gut feeling, that unspoken sense of what's right for you, might actually be the smartest way forward.
Okay, so let's pull back the curtain on this disconnect, because it shows up in some really interesting places, like with Sandy Gottesman. When he interviews people for his investment team, he doesn't ask for, market predictions or hot stock tips.
No complex models.
Nope. Just, what do you own and why? He's not after what you think is cheap, based on some analysis. He wants to know what you personally believe in enough to put your own money into, your actual skin in the game.
Right, your real commitment. And it's pretty wild how often that commitment seems to be, well, missing, even where you'd least expect it.
Like where?
Well, there was this Morningstar study. It found that half of all U.S. mutual fund managers don't invest a single penny of their own cash in the funds they actually manage for other people.
Wait, half. That seems, I don't know, counterintuitive, almost hypocritical.
It feels that way, doesn't it? But the source suggests maybe it's less about hypocrisy and more just common. This gap between professional advice and personal practice, it happens more than you'd think.
And it's not just finance, right? You see it in other fields, too.
Definitely. Think about doctors. There was this really powerful essay back in 2011 by Dr. Ken Murray, How Doctors Die.
Oh, I think I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, he's a professor at USC. And he found that when doctors themselves are facing, the end of life, a terminal illness, they often choose very little medical treatment.
Really? Less than they might recommend?
Often, yeah. They tend to opt for palliative care, comfort, managing symptoms, focusing on, as he put it, going gently, often at home with family. It's quite a contrast to the sometimes very aggressive do-everything approach they might offer patients.
Wow. So why the difference? Why do they choose one path for themselves and maybe suggest another for others?
Well, that really gets to the core of it. For these incredibly complex, deeply emotional issues, end-of-life care, big financial choices, the source argues pretty convincingly that there just isn't one universal truth. There's no single right answer that fits everyone.
Okay, so it's more personal.
It's entirely personal. It's about what works for you, for your family, what lets you feel okay, what helps you sleep at night. These big decisions, they're not just numbers on a page.
They're made around the dinner table, you mean?
Exactly. Often driven by wanting to avoid regret later or protect your family, not just chasing the absolute highest return possible on paper.
So, okay, if that's the case,
Right.
what does financial success really even look like then? Because it sounds like it's not just about piling up the most money.
Precisely. The philosophy we're really digging into today isn't just about getting rich or beating the market. It's something more fundamental. It's the pursuit of independence.
Independence, okay.
Yeah, the legendary investor Charlie Munger, he put it so well. He said, "I did not intend to get rich. I just wanted to get independent."
That's a really interesting shift. It's not about the dollar amount, but the freedom it buys you.
Exactly. The freedom to choose, to control your own life, your own time. That's the real prize.
So independence means what? Like being able to walk away from a job you don't like?
That's a huge part of it. The source defines it as doing only the work you like with people you like at the times you want for as long as you want. And they share this really powerful story about the author's dad. He was an ER doctor, high stress obviously, worked in it for 2 decades, and then one day at age 40, he just quit.
Just like that.
Just like that. Because he could. And that ability, that power to just wake up and decide, okay, I'm changing things starting today, completely on your own terms whenever you feel ready. I mean, that feels like the ultimate financial goal, right?
Yeah, the source called it the grandmother of all financial goals. I like that.
Me too. And here's the kicker.
What's that?
Achieving that kind of freedom, that independence, it doesn't necessarily require a huge income like an ER doctor's.
Really? So how does it work then?
The real driver, the engine behind independence, isn't so much your income level, but your savings rate, how much you're putting away.
Okay, savings rate. Makes sense.
And once you're earning, a decent living, what mostly controls your savings rate isn't getting a raise, it's your ability to keep your lifestyle expectations from constantly inflating, keeping things in check.
Avoiding lifestyle creep.
Exactly. Which leads to this idea they call stopping the goalposts.
Upping the goalposts.
Yeah. The author and their spouse, they had rising incomes for over 10 years, one in finance, one in healthcare. But they consciously decided to pretty much stick with the same moderate lifestyle they had when they were just starting out.
So, decent apartment, decent car, decent food. Nothing too fancy.
Right. They found it comfortable. They just didn't feel the need to constantly upgrade everything as their paychecks got bigger. They essentially said, okay, this is good enough. Let's stop moving the goalposts for what enough means.
And because they did that,
Almost every extra dollar they earned from raises didn't just get absorbed into spending more. It went straight into savings, into their independence fund, as they call it.
So their savings rate just kept going up and up.
Continuously. It wasn't about being stingy. They just weren't particularly motivated by more stuff. Their aspirations kind of plateaued in that area, so they just let the goalposts sit there.
That takes discipline, though.
It does, but think about the psychological benefit. By choosing not to constantly upgrade, you sidestep that whole exhausting game of keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, that relentless comparison trap.
Exactly. Nassim Taleb, the author, has this brilliant line, "True success is exiting some rat race to modulate one's activities for peace of mind."
Peace of mind. That's a huge win, often totally overlooked.
Enormous. And it frees you up to make decisions that might look, let's say, irrational if you're only looking at spreadsheets.
Okay, like what kind of decisions?
Well, take their choice to own their house outright. No mortgage.
No mortgage. But interest rates have been so low for ages. Financially, that seems questionable.
Oh, they totally admit it. The source says flat out, on paper, it was probably the worst financial decision they made. Any advisor would say, leverage that cheap debt. Invest the difference in stocks for higher returns.
Right. Standard advice.
But for them, it wasn't about the math. It was about feeling secure.
Yeah.
Independent. Getting rid of that monthly mortgage payment gave them this incredible sense of freedom that they valued way more than potentially higher, but also less certain, investment gains.
So it comes back to that choice. Do you want to be happy, or do you want to be technically right, according to the spreadsheet?
Exactly. And they chose happy or maybe secure. Another example. They keep a really high percentage of their assets in cash.
Cash, like just sitting there.
Yeah, something like 20% of their investable assets outside of their house value, just cash. Which, again, from a pure investment return perspective,
It's hard to defend. You're losing out on potential growth.
totally indefensible on paper, but they don't see it as idle cash losing to inflation. They call it the oxygen of independence.
Oxygen of independence. How so?
Because having that buffer means they are never, ever forced to sell their growth investments, their stocks at a bad time just because some unexpected large expense pops up.
So it protects the long-term investment.
Precisely. It lets the compounding keep working. Remember Charlie Munger again. The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. Their bedrock belief is that everyone eventually faces some huge expense they didn't see coming.
A medical bill, job loss, roof caves in.
Something. And that cash reserve makes it much, much more likely they can ride out that storm without having to wreck their long-term investment plan. It lets compounding do its magic over decades.
Okay, so this focus on independence, on sleeping well, on avoiding forced selling. How does that shape their actual investment portfolio? What do they own?
It's led to, well, simplification. The author mentions that back in their 20s, they used to be an active stock picker, holding maybe 25 different individual stocks.
Trying to beat the market.
Yeah, the usual goal. But now they own only low-cost index funds.
It's just index funds,
Yeah.
like S&P 500 trackers.
Pretty much broad U.S. and international index funds. The shift happened because they came to believe that, for most people, trying to pick winning stocks or time, the market is just low odds.
The odds aren't in your favor.
Right. They figure just consistently investing, dollar cost averaging, into a simple, low-cost index fund gives you the highest probability of long-term success.
And the data kind of backs that up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. That stat they mentioned, 85% of large-cap active fund managers failed to beat their benchmark, the S&P 500, over the decade ending in 2019. That's pretty telling.
So it's like trying to become a pro athlete. Some people can do it, but
But the odds are stacked against most of us. So why take on the extra risk and effort if a simpler approach works well?
So their current strategy is just straightforward.
Remarkably so. Invest regularly from each paycheck into those broad index funds. Max out retirement accounts like 401ks or IRAs. Contribute to 529 plans for the kids' college savings.
Yeah, that's it. No complex trades, no chasing trends.
That's pretty much the extent of the effort. It comes from this belief that there's actually very little connection between how much effort you put into investing and the results you get.
Really. Less effort can be okay.
They argue yes, because market returns are often driven by tails, meaning a few really big winners or a few major events account for the vast majority of the overall long-term gains. Trying to micromanage constantly doesn't necessarily help you capture those.
So keep it simple, stay consistent, let compounding work, and have that cash buffer for emergencies.
That seems to be the core strategy, because if you can reach all your financial goals, achieve that independence, without the stress and risk of trying to outperform everyone else, why wouldn't you?
Makes sense. The ultimate goal isn't beating the market.
Nope. The ultimate goal is independence. It's maximizing your ability to sleep well at night. And that, they argue, is the real mastery of the psychology of money.
Wow. So this whole deep dive it really drives home that there isn't just one right way to handle your money or your life, really.
Absolutely not. We saw it with Gottesman's question, with the doctor's personal choices, with this family focusing squarely on independence. It's all about how deeply personal values and priorities shape everything.
Yeah, the path to feeling financially secure, it isn't always about chasing every last dollar or maximizing returns on paper.
Often, maybe more often, it's about finding what genuinely gives you peace of mind, what allows you to live life on your own terms.
It comes back to that quote from the source. No one is crazy. People do things that make sense to them, given their own experiences and goals.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up, maybe the question for you listening is, what really stood out to you from this look at the psychology of money? And how might your own definition of financial success, your own path, look different from what the traditional advice might say?